Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Hi, I'm Lori Lefkowitz. I direct the Jewish Studies program here at Northeastern, and with a number of members, people in this room, participate in the Holocaust Awareness Committee, which plans a full week of events. Marty Blatt, who's a professor of public history, is also on that committee and will momentarily introduce today's speaker, whom I have heard before and whose story is remarkable and who's really an extraordinary person. You're in for a treat. But I did want to alert you to the fact that we are, this is the second of several programs for the week. And tonight at what time? 7:30? 7:30 in Raytheon. 7:30 in Raytheon. There will be a very important discussion, and I really hope that that you try to come if you can. And that is a program on Nazism and fascism then and now. The speakers are two world-renowned historians, Jeff Ellie from the University of Michigan and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who's a professor at I wanted to say Northeastern, but of course that's not true. At New York University. Hello, NYU. But they're both really extraordinary historians of the period of Nazism in Europe, and they're going to make connections to our own moments. I cannot imagine a program that's more important. And this is a discussion rather than, two formal talks, a discussion that will be moderated by our own Uta Poiger, who's the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities here at Northeastern. And Uta is herself a historian of Germany. So it should be a really remarkable program. And I know that we have such an embarrassment of riches around here that one hardly knows which things to attend. But if you can, attend this one. And then the week's commemoration, the week it concludes with an actual commemoration of the Holocaust, the least academic, the most ritually meaningful of the week's occasions, and that is tomorrow in Blackman at 6 p.m., where Gideon Klein-Scholar, one of your colleagues, I see lots of students here, for which I am very grateful, one of your colleagues, a student, Daniel Murad Weiss, has choreographed dancers, that is also other students, whose performance will be dramatizing, dancing to, illustrating poetry related to the Holocaust. It is, I am told, a very powerful and moving performance. This is something where you will exercise your heart, not just your mind. And I really would urge you to support your colleague and to have that commemorative experience by coming tomorrow as well. So tonight at 7:30 in Raytheon, and tomorrow at 6 p.m. in Blackman. And now, without further ado, my colleague, Professor Martin Blatt, who is a professor of history, public history at Northeastern. And there are flyers. I'm going to just pass them around. If you need a reminder, help yourself.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Anna Ornstein. She's a retired professor of child psychiatry from the University of Cincinnati, and she's a lecturer in child psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Ornstein has served on numerous editorial boards and has published over 100 articles in her chosen field of psychoanalysis, and several papers related to the Holocaust. Her memoir, My Mother's Eyes, Holocaust Memories of a Young Girl, has become a favorite reference in schools and universities where the Holocaust is taught, and it's available here today. Thank you to the bookstore for helping us out, bookstore here at Northeastern. It's available for if you have cash or check is how you could pick up a copy of the book. Dr. Ornstein was born and raised in a small agricultural village in northern Hungary in a traditional Jewish family. Allied with the Germans during World War II, The Hungarian government had adopted the anti-Jewish Nuremberg laws after these had been passed following Hitler's rise to power. These laws curtailed Jewish life severely at all levels. Jews could not work for non-Jewish companies, they could not travel freely, and persecutions and harassments were a fact of daily life. In 1944, German troops occupied Hungary, and the deportation and killing of Hungarian Jews quickly followed. In 5 short weeks, 450,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered, mainly in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Anna and her mother survived several concentration camps. Her father and extended family were killed in Auschwitz, and her 2 brothers, ages 20 and 22, died in forced labor battalions. Anna and her mother returned to Hungary in the summer of 1945. She married Paul Ornstein, a fellow survivor, in 1946. The young couple escaped communist Hungary into West Germany, where they attended medical school at the University of Heidelberg. And I have to note, my mother grew up in Heidelberg and fled in 1938. Many of her family were murdered by the Nazis, who could not get out. After medical school in Heidelberg, the Ornsteins immigrated to the United States in 1951, where they both became psychiatrists and psychoanalysts. The Ornsteins were on the faculty of the University of Cincinnati until their retirement in 2000, when they moved to the Boston area to be near their children and grandchildren. And currently, Dr. Ornstein resides in Brookline, Massachusetts, just right around the corner. The format we're going to follow is, by the way, if you're still hungry, don't be shy. There's plenty of food. Just you can get up while talking is going on and get something to eat. But Dr. Ornstein will speak for somewhere 30 to 40 minutes, and we will have plenty of time. And she, in fact, encourages you to engage in questions, discussion, conversation. And so her topic today is what history can teach us, reflections of a Holocaust survivor. I'm very proud to introduce you, Dr. Anna Ornstein.
Very, very good. As I told you, I really want this to be a conversation. You would wonder, because how can you speak to so many people? Not everybody feels that they want to say something, but many of you do. And I organized my own comment in a very, I don't want to call it superficial, but they are not very deep going, because it would be impossible. There are so many issues related to the Holocaust, to Nazism, to fascism. It would be impossible to cover it all. What would be very helpful to me and to you and to this whole experience is that you ask many questions, or as many as you have on your mind, or other people stimulate in your mind as you're listening to others. So this is why I have only maybe a half an hour so I can cover some of it. First of all, I should have thanked you for having invited me. I am really very, very pleased to be here. I was invited last year, and I was very much looking forward to it. You had a fantastic program. I know, because I read Philip Sand's book, but this is what happened. I couldn't make it, so here I am. And when I looked at my paper of last year, I said, what did I intend to say? I still have, my heavens, it was so outdated. And that made me, that gave me a little bit of the shivers. What had happened? That what I wanted to talk about last year would make no sense today. So much has happened in our country that we can no longer talk about the Holocaust without referencing similarities, differences in what is happening. And that was not the case yet a year ago. I wouldn't have known that. So I was in a way not surprised when you people decided to give the theme of Nazism and fascism and learn more about that. But when you come to this point in the United States, then you have to say, have we really come to a place when we have to fear these authoritarian and repressive forms of government? It never occurred to me that we will ever come to a point where we have to be afraid and worry about that. I'm going to read some of my paper, because I have the tendency to go off. And then I talk much more than I have time for. So I keep myself organized and a little bit better disciplined that way. Now, I also know that most of you would like to know about my personal experiences. Many people say that really would be very helpful to know what it was like. I am very open, very free to do that. But I feel it would be taking too much time. So in your questions, I hope you will feel free to ask me anything about the camp experiences. And my book is not a memoir. These are really strictly description of my experiences, memories of the camp. So if you get the book, then you don't have to listen to me. And I will drink quite a bit. I have a very bad cold. So rather than detailing my camp life, I like to begin today by telling you about my experiences in Germany after the war. What life was like for a young Jewish couple in West Germany between the years 1946 and 51. After returning to Budapest from the camp where we were liberated by the Russians, I was liberated in May 1945. Took about 2 months to get back to Hungary. I was then 18, so I almost finished high school, not quite. I had to get my junior year finished and get my matura. So I went back to school, finished high school. I got married to a young man whom I had known before the German occupation. And the two of us, along with my husband's father and two of his friends, escaped from communist Hungary into West Germany. Now, during the years 1946-51, while studying medicine in Heidelberg, we first lived in the home of an SS officer who was still in a POW camp. After a very difficult year, this woman was not happy to have a Jewish family live in her home. We moved into the home of a Nazi, a much better situation, and we were very welcome there. And in Germany, while living there, we also befriended a clergyman who was a member of the resistance and rescued the Jewish children into Palestine in the 30s. Now, this landed him eventually in a concentration camp. Getting to know a variety of people who lived in the same political system left me with a puzzling question. How do we understand the difference between those who eagerly followed a discriminatory and repressive regime and those who made an effort to put up resistance against such a regime? This is a very complicated question, and I'm not even trying to address it at this time, because you have to really study the individual to understand what made it possible for people to resist, because it was not a simple matter, not because of the speed with which events occurred. And this is what I will focus on. How quickly things happen that you don't anticipate, and how difficult it is to really get ready for something that when you don't know what may be coming. So I cannot discuss this in depth. However, we can say that the whole country was exposed to the steady Nazi propaganda, so steady and so influential that very few people could actually escape it. As you know, when Hitler finally made it, he had the majority of the population. What was it? 90-some%? Propaganda, certainly in its extreme form of brainwashing. Think of China. How did China turn into communism in a relatively short period of time? So propaganda is capable of undermining one's individual sense of morality and becomes superseded by various political ideologies. You have communism, fascism, Nazism, Zionism, take any isms. They are capable of undoing individual morality. Having gotten to know people with a variety of political attitudes, I was most affected by my discussion with Mr. Pabst, the Nazi I mentioned, the second home, who was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party and whose teenage children all belonged to the Hitler Youth. Mr. Pabst, in my mind, is absolutely the perfect bystander. First of all, we were very welcome, as I mentioned earlier, in this home. They painted the room nicely. There were flowers on the table. And an invitation, come and share the kitchen with us. You can have meals with us. Certainly the use of the kitchen was open for me, which was not true for the SS lady. She had very strict orders. I had to be back home at 6 o'clock if I wanted to use the faucet to get some water. If I came 5 after 6 too late, I couldn't go into the kitchen. That was not true. The Pabsts were very welcoming, and Mr. Pabst very eager to tell me and to have me understand and really accept his reason for joining the party and why his children all belonged to the youth movement. And I was very curious and, frankly, as I look back on it, very eager to understand, not with the mind that I would have today. I was a youngster. I was 19, 20 years old. I knew no psychoanalysis or in-depth psychology. Nor did I know enough about politics. All I know, I just came out from a concentration camp, and you were somehow part of it, but I did not know how, in what way. Now I understand how much bystanders have to do with the maintenance of a regime without them knowing that this is what they are doing. There is now I know it, a psychic mechanism that makes it possible for you to attend only to what you want to attend to and to really get very knowledgeable about that. What did he want to know? He was a pharmacist. He said to me, which was not even true, but I accepted it. I didn't know better, that he could have lost his license. No way. People didn't. You need a pharmacist. You couldn't just lose your license because you didn't belong to the party. But it offered so many advantages for his children in particular. Young people, they loved it. They could go on these trips. They could make, this is folks. This is the nationalism part of it, where you have to get back to the basics, and everybody was filled with this Germanic. They go back to their original mythical, vigorous nature, and everything will be fine. And extraordinary levels of enthusiasm would be created in these groups. And actually those, because I then later met many people who didn't belong to the party, they suffered that kind of an exclusion. So you wanted your children to have a good teenage, and I had to ask myself, where would I belong if I was not a victim of this circumstance? Since then, I'm learning about the permeability of our brain. You are all shaking your heads. You are all, some of you who are studying maybe the neurosciences. Propaganda affects your brain. It does leave stuff behind that is not easy to get rid of. Torture helps, but you don't need torture to get to it. So living in close proximity with Germans soon after the war, and having survived several concentration camps a year earlier, gave me an opportunity to recognize the relativity of morality. The relativity, you keep it in mind, is as against absolutism. We live in the modern era. You cannot think of morality being a code that would be a code of behavior that would work in all societies at the same time. They have all become relative in relationship to so many other things. So morality too is being contextualized. Now many people are very critical of this, because if you become so relative in terms of the morality, then how do you define right and wrong? So many people now begin to think, is morality something that you could describe as the goodness in oneself? It's good to be good because you need other people. So if you're good to them, they will be good to you, and maybe it's a good thing to be good. Somehow it doesn't work to be good. But I wish it would, because that would be the answer. And then we could maybe make morality absolute. I don't know. At this moment, moral behavior is very dependent on the context in which it happens. I tell you where it was very, very clear to me, in these extreme conditions that existed in the camps. Because on the side of the perpetrators, I myself could experience the ruthlessness, the cruelty that a society can reach when it is totally void of any moral consideration. On the side of the victims, maybe because we Hungarian Jews were in a little better situation, it was possible for us to create little groups. The nucleus of the group would be maybe two sisters, a mother and a daughter, very rare. My mother was, she thought people looked at us somewhat envious for being together. Not somewhat, very. This was a very special situation. So people would come, and my mother would embrace them. 2, 3 other people would join the group. And that helped, because within the group, you develop like a family. There would be fights, there would be arguments, there would be rivalry, there would be whatever happens in a family. But there was loyalty. There was something that held us together. We looked out. In the men's group, I learned later, and in the female groups too, on long marches, on death marches. I think Elie Wiesel writes about that, how they carried each other. So we tried to hold on to some of these ways of caring for others, because this was the way to preserve one's humanity under those conditions. No, during my 45 years in my profession, I never worried about morality. This was not a topic I was attracted to or worked over. But today, in 2018, as America is experiencing a major political crisis, I have returned to these questions. It appears that we all have become more keenly aware of the impact that the political and the social have on mental life, how corrosion and gradual disappearance of moral principles are affecting our daily lives. My next part that I wrote I call Into the Darkness. How can a democracy die? Since our interest today is on the threat that the current government poses to American democracy, in the following I will use Germany as an example of how democracy may die and will contrast and compare the situation in Germany in the 30s with the current events. Here. Political issues that first appear at a distance, either historically and or geographically, may become increasingly closer and more personal with time. I had found this to be true in my conversations with teachers and students when I visit public and private schools, which I had done for many years. As a Holocaust survivor, I am asked to speak to the youngsters because it makes the experience more real to them. Generally, the students are well prepared for my visits. They are eager to participate in the question and answer period. Among the many questions, there has been one that almost always comes up in the discussion. Dr. Ornstein, could it happen here, what happened to you? In the past, I did not hesitate with my response. I reminded the children that we are a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country, and that we have a document, the Constitution, that is to safeguard the democratic principles by which this country was established and has been governed. No one party or person could become so powerful as to oppress individuals or discriminate or persecute people on the basis of ethnicity and or religion. Yes, I would say there continues to be discrimination and prejudice, and American racial laws remained active long after the Civil War. The Constitution did not protect all its citizens equally. However, as a whole, the country has been moving in the direction of tolerance and acceptance of differences. With many obstacles in the way and with great deal of effort, progress has been made to integrate public schools to ensure voting rights and human rights. However, after the 2016 elections, when I was asked this question, I could not be so quick with my reassuring answers. Now I had to think, what do I know about the gradual disappearance of democracies around the world? After having grown up in a feudal system in pre-war Hungary, I lived in two autocratic and repressive regimes, the Third Reich and briefly in communist Hungary, after which here in America, I was at times incredulous that you could say whatever you were thinking about without fearing arrest. Now, eventually, like most Americans, I began a bit complacent. Is that? I don't say it right. I began to take American democracy for granted. Liberal democracy, actually, appeared to have a bright future in the second half of the 20th century. Nazi Germany was in ruins. In 1989, the Soviet Union, that had spread terror in Eastern Europe, fell apart, and democracies began to establish relatively stable governments. Beyond Europe, apartheid fell in South Africa. Even peace in the Middle East looked at as a possibility with the Oslo Agreement. But where are we today? The European Union, that was to secure lasting peace in Europe, began to wobble because its mainstay, Germany, is struggling. Finally, it was able to form a government because it has to keep its right wing in check. And here in America, we are concerned whether or not we will be able to hold on to the two most fundamental aspects of our democracy: free speech, free press, I wanted to say, goes together actually, and an independent judicial system. When comparing the situation between the US and Germany in the 1930s, clearly the differences are far greater than other similarities. The two countries differ in all important aspects. They differ in their histories and in their political and social circumstances. Still, the question remains whether our system of government, specifically the checks and balances that are built into the American democracy, could resist the events as this occurred in Germany. What happened in Germany between the two world wars was, I would say, a perfect storm. Losing the First World War, Germany was handed a peace deal with extremely stringent terms. The new government had to pay large sums of reparation money. Germany and its allies lost a great deal of territory, and they were ordered to demilitarize. All profoundly humiliating demands. The perfect storm was complete with increasing unemployment and the collapse of Europe's economy and a worldwide depression in 1929. Even when considering that the economic situation in the Rust Belt in this country carries a great deal of responsibility for the outcome of the 2016 election, economically, this is a far cry from the conditions as this existed in Germany and all of Europe after World War I. The short-lived democracy of the Weimar Republic between 1919 and 1933 was no match to the increasing popularity of ultranationalist movement, the Nazi Party. Germany was ready, economically and emotionally, to embrace a megalomaniac who promised to rebuild Germany's superiority in the world. All Hitler needed was to find a scapegoat, a group of people who could be made responsible for the military debacle in the First World War and the following economic collapse around the world. The Jews were the perfect target. I have to stop here because I have to ask you this question. It's a bit of an experiment. What percentage of the population were the Jews? I asked you this question? That's why you're smiling? No. What percentage of the population in Germany were Jewish at the time of the rise of Hitler? If you give me a number, I would love it. 1, 2, yes, more than one. Yes?
I think less than 5%.
5%?
Less than.
Wasn't it like 500,000 total?
You know what? Even though I do have a hearing aid, it's not in my ears. So wait a minute, maybe I can fix this and hear what you said, because I didn't what you said. What percentage was it? Speak up. Now I can hear you better.
I don't remember a percentage, but it was less than 1 million in Germany.
You would say
Less than 1 million.
less than 1 million. This is probably coming closer. Now you will be surprised. It was less than 1%. Most people say 5, like you did, or even higher. And that has to do with their visibility. They were a very visible minority. They were you know, universities, sciences, literature, they were there. And that was good, and that was obviously not so good, because they were easy target as being all over the world, and therefore conspiracy theories had a field day with that. They could conspire because they had other Jews in all over the world, even England and the Allies. So in this country, to come to our place now, the scapegoats are not Jews, but Muslims and immigrants. However, once a minority is scapegoated, latent and ever-present anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia are reactivated. They go together. Scapegoating in a relatively well-functioning democracy is particularly dangerous. The current anti-immigration edicts have a strong racist underpinning. Racism is still a potent presence in social and political life in this country. In the 19th and the early 20th centuries, America led the world in race-based legislations. The Nazis used American racial laws to boost their own. Racial laws guaranteed immigration from Northern Europe and limited entrance of Jews, Italians, Asians, and others. Violators of the mixed marriage laws that were, I think, on the books for a very long time were also severely punished. The manner in which the current anti-immigration trend is fueled by deeply entrenched racist attitudes is not very different from the way Hitler used centuries-old anti-Semitism to ensure the passage of anti-Semitic legislation. However, by putting American racial laws into the context of a larger, more dominant American history, makes it clear that this was not the direction that the country had taken in the 20th century. After defeating Nazi Germany, the government embraced a more liberal and progressive tone, and the advocates for white supremacy went into the shadows. The 20th century witnessed a strong civil rights movement. Gays and lesbians had achieved legitimacy as the country was returning to the principles on which it was founded. It was returning, we hoped, to the principle of human equality. Recognizing the dangers that any state might become dominant with a particular ideology, the Constitution had set limits to the power of the states. Up until recently, until January 2017, the federal government has been opposing and was actively fighting against endemic racism, against discrimination based on ethnicity and religion. However, once prejudices become state-sanctioned, whether openly, as in Germany, or by innuendos by people in authority, as in the United States, passions are ignited and violence can readily erupt in public gatherings. Whether politically motivated or because of personal vendetta, the easy availability of guns in this political atmosphere ought to be of grave concern to all. James Gilligan, one of the most respected authorities on violence, considers the president to be extremely dangerous. This is in a book on Trump himself by 27 psychiatrists. His view, this is Gilligan's view, is based on Trump's own public pronouncements in which he makes, quote, numerous threats of violence, incitements of violence, and boast of violence that he acknowledges having committed, end of quote. In the 1930s, Germany witnessed a series of legislations against I am going back and forth between America. Non-Aryan minorities. Still, it was not until 1938, at the time of Kristallnacht, when synagogues were burning, when looting and destruction of Jewish stores resulted in 91 deaths, when beatings and suicides claimed additional victims, and when 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to already existing concentration camps. It was only then that this event made it finally clear to the Jews just how precarious their lives in Germany had become. So, we have to ask ourselves, what happened that night? What happened that night that made this the final wake-up call, when already in 1935, that is 3 years earlier, the Nuremberg racial laws were passed and were followed by about 400 anti-Semitic legislations. And book burning occurred in 1933, that is 5 years before Kristallnacht. None of these events and the progressive restrictions of civil rights had the impact that Kristallnacht did, because, and this is my point, the events of that night changed the situation for German and Austrian Jews. It happened in one single night. And this is the drastic change. From economic, political, and social persecution in one night, persecution turned into physical violence and became murderous. Now it was beatings, incarcerations, and killings. And we have an important lesson to learn from the fact that only physical violence created panic, when finally German Jews in great numbers desperately tried to leave the country. I believe that it was the gradual acceptance of earlier restrictions on their daily lives and the normalization of laws and regulations that ought to have been questioned and resisted that encouraged the National Socialist government to increase anti-Jewish legislation and eventual incarcerations and killings of Jews, Gypsies, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Everyone they considered to be the enemy of the state. As long as the restrictions were only economic and social, they were accepted and considered temporary. Now, in this country, many still wonder whether or not the increase in anti-Semitic incidents, and here the number that ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, gives us is a bit sobering. There have been over 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents in 2017, which is an increase of 86% of the previous year. The frequent shaming and assaults on the Muslim population in public places, and some of these people wonder, do these really indicate an increase in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim attitudes? Now, Timothy Snyder, and he should be your next guest, by the way.
We did try to invite
Yeah.
Oh, if you get Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder, whom I heard a few times, and read every one of his books too. A Yale historian and a recognized authority on the Holocaust has this warning. I'm quoting Snyder. The symbols of today, swastikas painted on the walls of schools' bathroom, and I saw them. I know they are occurring. The symbols of today are the reality of tomorrow. Do not look away and do not get used to them. End of quote. The danger is in the gradual acceptance and normalization of behavior that ought not be accepted, because these are the early signs of how a democracy can be gradually undermined and destroyed. One of the greatest dangers in Germany was not to have taken Hitler seriously and dismiss him as a madman. Nobody could believe that what Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf 1925 could actually happen in the 20th century, in the middle of Europe, in the most literate and most highly educated country in the world. But then it did. As I mentioned earlier, in 1946, less than a year after the war and before the Iron Curtain descended between East and West in Europe, my husband and Paul and I, along with his father, I have mentioned that before, we left Budapest. When we arrived in West Germany, the newspapers were full with news about the Nuremberg war trials. As you know, none of the 22 major Nazis on trial denied their actions during the Holocaust, but all insisted on not having felt guilt then nor afterwards. They felt neither guilt nor responsibility toward their victims. In the legal sense, they were right. The actions for which they were tried did not involve the violation of a law. The Nuremberg racial laws made it a virtue rather than a crime to kill unarmed women and children. Individual conscience was not permitted to supersede state law. Those who behaved in keeping with their own individual sense of morality were persecuted and incarcerated. Now, what happened to the sense of morality of these perpetrators who had planned and executed heinous crimes over many years? How could the same people be responsible members of an organized and highly efficient society? As we are now witnessing the rise of Nazism in Germany and in much of Europe, we came to realize that the anti-Semitic and xenophobic sentiments in Germany had never died. Alexander Senft, the granddaughter of one of the major perpetrators, recently wrote about her grandfather, Hans Luden, whose signature had sent 70,000 Slovak Jews to their death. This is what I'm in contact with Alexandra regularly, so I got this in her last mail. This is a quote from her. My grandfather was executed as a as a World War II war criminal. I know why Germany still has a Nazi problem. It was always other Germans who perpetrated Nazi crimes, not our families. That's the lie that has enabled the far right to return to power in Germany. In spite of abundance of economic efforts, denial in Germany over Nazi crimes was and is still alive and kicking, and a system of complicity and silence as well. As long as Nazism crimes and violations are seen to be related solely to those outside one's inner circle, the mechanism of denial and silencing create complicity. Family loyalty is thus built on lies and misinterpretation of love, end of quote. Senft clearly sees the current triumph of Nazism in the perpetrators' inability to admit their crimes and their family members' conspiracy of silence. The leaders and the followers of the far-right party that is in Germany now is the third largest of the German Bundestag. These are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the Nazi era perpetrators and bystanders. In most Western societies, only after appropriate punishment can murderers be readmitted to society. By and large, this opportunity was lost in Germany after the war. While the government delivered material restitution to the survivors and has built memorials for the victims, it was unable to deliver what is needed for moral restitution. It failed to bring justice to its criminals. The Nuremberg war trials and the onset of the Cold War appear to have absolved large number of perpetrators who were able to continue their lives without ever having to account for their criminal activities. I believe that what happened in Europe during World War II and the 12 years of tyranny in Nazi Germany could never happen in this country. I can't imagine that. However, this does not mean that we have nothing to worry about. We need to know what kind of changes do we have to look for that could potentially take us there. There are good reasons why many people are making the comparison between Germany in the 30s and the current state of affairs in this country. Germany's slide into a popular embrace of authoritarianism that ended in tyranny offers a frame of understanding how liberal democracies can, in a relatively short period of time, be totally destroyed. In this country, minimizing, accepting, and dismissing utterances and behavior by people in authority could be the first steps that can lead to the destruction of moral values that most Americans hold dear. Similar to Hitler, after the first shock of a Trump presidency, many tried to dismiss him as an ineffectual puppet until he proved his ability to hold on to a loyal political base and to succeed in seducing his party to go along with many of his undemocratic and destructive ideas. We have to take note and be concerned about the fact that normalization and gradual acceptance of anti-democratic behavior has been underway in the first year of his administration. I'm thinking of undoing the regulation that would protect the environment, the undoing of regulations that would protect consumers in banking, and most recently, replacing local newscasts with a centrally controlled news outlet, Sinclair. The president, totally preoccupied with his own status and his own legal problems, had become an embarrassment to most Americans as he fails to provide moral leadership to our country. A further lesson we have to learn is that serious resistance has to be mounted as soon as there is indication that democratic principles are under attack. In Germany, the early resistance by the political opposition, by the communists and social democrats was ineffectual. But we have something going on in this country that makes me feel better. While I place great confidence in our democratic institutions, including the FBI, and our political system in which elections give American citizens the opportunity to vote out the system, I also hear the voices of those who think that it is too late, that our democratic system is no longer being safeguarded by an independent judicial system, regardless of which political party may hold power. Many cite Citizens United as proof that the Supreme Court is now fully politicized and can no longer be trusted to come to a non-partisan decision in political issues. In our current political climate, I'm placing my hope in you, into the protest marches, acts of civil disobedience, and in federal judges not yet replaced by the current administration. But my greatest hope is in our young people. It is their clear vision of the direction that this country has to take that could save our democracy from the jaded, amoral behavior of many of our political leaders. The question is whether or not this resistance that I'm talking about is sufficient to counterbalance the collaboration of Congress with the destructive efforts of the executive branch of government. The danger, I believe, is the gradual and steady caving in of the elected officials who, fearful of losing their positions, appear to follow the leader regardless of how destructive his policies may be to our democracy. I think I spoke much longer than I should have, but I interrupted myself a few times. But now, this is it. Thank you for being such a good audience.
Your questions and comments, we have a lot of people here, so as focused as you can be, that allows as many as possible to participate. So, and as Dr. Ornstein said, any topic you want to hear about her experience during the war, that's a fair question. Anything you want to raise.
Correct.
So, yes, go ahead. Can you stand and...
We need the microphone so we can...
Oh, capture, all right.
Thank you so much for speaking, and every year that I attend speakers like yourself, I just feel like it's so more important. And my question is, how do we educate future generations? I'm on the older end of the millennial generation, and the generation coming behind me. How do we educate them when your generation and as Holocaust survivors and also World War II generation is no longer here? Because I truly am worried about the apathy of my generation being ignorant of the history that you all have gone through, and I think it's so important that we are able to pass down the lessons that you all had to learn, because if not, the history soon will repeat itself. Thank you.
I tell you, this is the biggest danger, not to be informed. The biggest danger is not to be informed. And you have, democracy is an extraordinarily fragile form of government, because it depends on all of us. And who wants to take responsibility ever, you know? Let me live. And it happened to me personally. At first, I was just amazed that you can just say what you think. But then, you know, I just accepted it. That's how it is. And I went about my own business until something had to happen to wake me up. And that's not what, we cannot afford that. I thought that in America, this will be forever. A democracy, because it was founded on democracy. We never knew anything else. This is not like any other country in the world. So it's easy to take it for granted until there is danger. Something is happening. And then you start to compare what can happen. How did, and what is so interesting, we had South America so close by. I don't have anything here. The South Americans could have taught us a lot. We just insulated ourselves. We are different. We don't have coups. We don't have martial laws, you know. We are a democratic country. Until you know, it can happen here too. Not in that big way, but anyway is bad. Nobody wants to give away the freedom that we so enjoy. Yes, you have to teach people. I understand civics had not been taught in elementary school for a long time. Did you know that? I did not know that. People don't find out what is democracy, that you are it. Voting and to vote, you are it. Thank you for your statement.
Yes, go ahead. You could stand and project.
Thank you for speaking. You know, this
Yeah, but they don't have you online then.
Oh, they want to record it, right?
No, it's okay that way. It turns out the two mics were on the same channel, so as long as you speak up. we
Okay,
will hear
fine.
you.
I can hear
Project.
you.
Yeah.
is good. I'm Mexican, so I can have a very loud voice. Your story so powerful, and it's so full of resilience that you had, not just to survive what you did in your childhood, but to build an entire new life here. As part of that process, how do you move past the anger, the hurt? I mean, I think right now we're at a period where we are all entrenched into our sides and neither of us want to budge. I think there's a lot of resentment and there's a lot of hatred in the conversation that we're having.
The hatred is directed to whom?
I think just between, like, as a victim, as a survivor, to the perpetrators, to those who wouldn't act, to those who weren't somehow complicit.
I tell you one thing, it's a totally ineffectual thing. To be angry, where do you go with it? Take a gun? Do something with it? No. This is a very, very big subject. One of the things, anger is a normal, ordinary, expectable response by human beings. However, there is anger when you were narcissistically hurt, when your pride was hurt, when your ego was bruised. And when that happens, anger takes on a different quality. Then you feel you have to retaliate. You have to get even. Again, retaliation, revenge had destroyed human relationships and national relationships. But it's also human nature when your own pride is hurt. I know my husband used to say, one of the things we had to do is put on a bulletproof vest against being humiliated. Because we, as Jews, Jewish children in Hungary, that's what we lived with. And our parents knew that we will be called dirty Jews and whatever. And they gave us something that we could be proud of, to be Jewish, something to be proud of. I remember in the 60s, we had big billboards in Cincinnati where we lived. Black is beautiful. People had to be told they are beautiful or they are smart, they are good. Because there were so many who spoke against that, and your own self, your own pride, who you were, was constantly assaulted that way. Now, for us Jewish children, it was not too difficult, because when it was called dirty Jew, I would say, and who are you exactly? Wait a minute, let's just do some comparison. How many Nobel Prize do you know who are Hungarians? They had one. I had a long list when it came to Nobel Prize winner. But this was artificial. You don't have to teach your children that. It should come natural. I think that for Paul and myself, I can only speak individually. I don't generalize, no. It was our upbringing by proud Jews. They were Zionists, believed that if we had a country, that would never happen. That's not necessarily true. But the idea that we are members of a tribe that had some good things done in life, not always, did bad things too, but we came and tried harder and survived, that made us feel that maybe we had a chance. And it's really counteracting humiliation and not responding immediately with hitting back, revenge, because that goes around and around. Thanks for that.
Yeah, could you stand and project?
Yes, no problem projecting.
Good.
Thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to ask you, both as an analyst and as a person with the history that you have, I feel like I grew up with the idea that Jews would be or were dedicated to social justice because of what Jews have been through. and then after growing up, realizing that's not always how it works.
Exactly.
Right? That is one thing we see in a pronounced way in the Jewish community, but we don't always see it. It's not reliable, and some people grow up and that experience or that identification works in a different way. And I'm wondering what you think explains that, and also what you would say to people like Stephen Miller and Jared Kushner and other Jews who are in the Trump circle and a part of this moment that we're all.
They didn't grow up with. They didn't grow up with my mom and my dad. We are human beings, and we have. This is what happens. You have it that way, and then you. And this is why you don't have to be Jewish to have good principles in life. And this. When I spoke earlier about the morality and the relativity of it, as a psychoanalyst, I'm going to tell you this. When a child can get by with a lie, it's a problem. When a child comes home and mother finds a stick of candy that she doesn't remember having paid for, says, where did you get this? Oh, you know what I did just before we left. Da, 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 da. Wait a minute. You come back with me. Take this candy. You already bit into it. It doesn't matter. You come back. And you gave it to the gentleman who's supposed to get money for this. When a child gets by with a lie, a little theft, a little this, I didn't finish my homework, I was only 10 minutes late. I write a lot about parenting. I think that one of the problems, at least in this generation of parents, was that their children began to rule them. They were afraid of the children. And that can be a problem. It is not Jewish or not Jewish. It is a matter of right and wrong. You don't have to believe in an absolute moral system, but you still cannot get morality to the point that you permit your child to pick up a 5-penny piece of candy without paying for it. And that happens. And that leads to many other. This is where you get your first hint of the importance of that you couldn't get away with it. This is what happened in Germany after the war. And it was, the Germans would never have gone after all the people because they would have to empty their, it would have been impossible. But not even the big guys could be caught because of the Cold War. But in terms of teaching children, it should start very early.
Yeah, Laura.
So, I'm grateful also, and I cannot imagine a topic more important and a call to action more important than the one that you've given us here today, and spoken with your accent and out of your experience, all the more urgent and powerful. So I'm immensely grateful, and I'm immensely grateful as an educator because you also give us a kind of permission to speak our hearts and minds in a climate when we often feel cautious. That said, I feel like I want to urge you to share with us some of the details of your own experience. That is,
Okay.
Describe, if you would, the experience of incarceration, when it happened, how it happened, and if you could tell us what happened to your father, and what that grief was, and how you carried it then, and how you carry it now. So I'm just for your personal experience, but I also completely want to bracket, and I have a different observation, and I don't know what to do with this, but again, I want to offer it to the room. You spoke to us about power and bullying and the erosion of values, and I'm just conscious of the relative percentage of women in the room. And I wonder how you in the room explain that to yourselves. Where are the men?
I didn't notice that. Okay, I will tell you briefly, or not so briefly, I don't know. The danger is I don't mind telling my story. No. Actually, somebody said, when did you start talking? And I don't remember not talking. One of the things probably that I should say first is we in Hungary, I shouldn't put it that way because I was really a child. And I suspect now my parents knew a great deal more of what happened to my cousins who disappeared in Slovakia. And we lived very near the border, only maybe 15 kilometers away from the Slovak border. I had relatives in Vienna, so it's impossible not to have known. At the same time, the war was going on, and we were still in our homes. The men were inducted. The men, my brothers, young men between the ages 18 and maybe 40 or so, they were taken into these battalions, the forced labor battalions, and they were cruel. They were horrible places. First of all, they had no uniforms, they had no guns, they were there. So who was home when the Germans occupied the country in 1944? It was mainly older people, children, women. I was 17 at the time. I was living, not at home, I was with my aunt in a town called Debrecen, and that was one place in Hungary that had a Jewish gymnasium. It was a boys' gymnasium, but admitted girls who passed Latin and algebra. I was there because my uncle was in forced labor battalion, my aunt was a teacher, so we were in a room as big as this, and dancing the hora, and hot and sweaty and happy, and not thinking about the world in large, other than tomorrow is school, so it's time to go home. But before we went home, the door opened, and a man came in, and that tells me the fact that we were always prepared for this, that the Germans eventually will come, and they did. So this man comes into the room, and they all stopped, looked at him. Yes, the Germans came into Budapest this afternoon. This is a Sunday afternoon. Everybody should go home, see what your parents would want to do. I couldn't go home because all the roads were blocked. Jews could not use public transportation. There was nothing else to do. I was determined to go home. Some difficulty, lots of difficulty. I managed. I arrived late at night into this small town. You heard already that I grew up in. And my parents were not happy to see me. They thought maybe I could have hidden in a bigger place. In Sandro, it was impossible. Everybody knew who was a Jew. But I didn't want to hide. I wanted to be where I thought was safety, which is to be with your parents. That's where safety is for a child. Not a child anymore. Still, I felt that way at age 17. I know I slept pretty much all the time after I got home, and the Germans were then all over the country. It took only days, and I don't remember exactly, but really very soon after the Germans arrived in March, that we put what they called a ghetto. It was only one house. Only the older people could have a chair or maybe a bed to sleep in. We were out in the garden most of the time. And we weren't there very long, with some stops on the way. Excuse me, I have to cough. I have to cough and take something. Yeah, right here. There were many. Speaking about anger, under these circumstances, you don't have time. You just look out for the moment. There is no way to get angry. It takes energy. Things are happening. Now you know already if the Germans are here, things will be happening. At first, as I said, we were in this ghetto because it was easier to gather people, to have them in one place, and then to take them to the train station. Now, who took us to the train station? These are mainly horse-drawn carriages. The peasants stood there like this. As I was saying the other day to another group, I imagine that what these peasants had in mind, that Mrs. Brunn, this is my mother, had fine linen in her closet. She had china and silverware. You know, the Jews were the middle class in these little towns. Little store, the doctor was a Jew, and we didn't have a lawyer, we had a pharmacist, some other shops. So these peasants just stood around simply because that's what they thought. That's what was immediate. They didn't think, oh, where do they take them? How come the Brunns or the Fürths or the so-and-sos are leaving? Nobody asked any questions. We as a family at this point, my mother, my father, and my 96-year-old grandmother. My grandmother wanted to be buried with my grandfather, you can well imagine, and that did not happen. And we were taken to these long trains where there were other people stuffed into these wagons. You must have seen many pictures of them. They usually have a barrel, something in the middle for your feces and vomit or whatever you have to do. But nobody made it. So the place becomes a place with human excrements very quickly. People are fainting. I know I was fainting. Mother trying to wake me up. I was sitting next to my grandmother in this wagon. We tried to secure a place for her where there was less pushing and shoving. And she said her evening prayers. She was a believer. She was a religious woman. And I wish I asked her whether she believed that anybody was listening to her then. I don't recall how long we were on the way. We never heard of Auschwitz. I had no idea what that place was. When we arrived and they opened the door, it was June. So it's supposed to be bright out there. It was a bright day, but was this black, heavy smoke that you could smell immediately. It smelled very sweet. And I heard my mother say that this was human flesh burning. I didn't believe it, or I couldn't believe it. So I asked her, what did you say? She said, no, that's a rumor. Frankly, I did not know what Auschwitz was. I didn't know it the first time, and we came back to Auschwitz. I didn't know it the second time. At that time, I did not know the difference between extermination camp and concentration camp. We were in Auschwitz then. You heard the stories of people cutting down the hair and all that. It was good that they did that because no more bathing, no more water. It was the first week we had no idea. Only much later, when I went back with my children, I was back in Auschwitz 3 times just to find out what that place was like. I found out that we were in that first week, we were very close to the crematoria because it was very important for Eichmann, who was responsible for the Hungarian Jewish extermination, to do the job, even though rumor had it, I am not sure of that, but Himmler supposedly have told Eichmann that the war is coming to an end, and indeed they could not get the Jews from Budapest anymore. You know that probably. No, you don't know about that the Jews were not taken out from Budapest. There was no way of collecting them. They were put into houses where they had to stay only maybe 2 hours a day that they could leave. The houses had big yellow stars on them. These were the yellow star houses. And from time to time, the Jews were taken out of the homes from these yellow star houses and then murdered at the Danube. They were shot into the Danube. I don't know if any of you went to Budapest ever. Yeah? Did you see the shoes along the Danube? Do you want to tell people about it?
Yeah, it's actually.
Somebody was in Budapest and saw the shoes. Could you speak up? I want to hear about that.
Sure.
Very loud.
My family's actually from Debrecen, so.
Oh, it's from Debrecen.
Yeah.
What do you say?
So I went to Budapest when I was studying abroad when I was in college. I'm a student at the law school, and they have like a row of children's shoes, I think, maybe adult shoes also, and they have candles in them.
They had candles at the
Yeah,
time. I didn't see
yeah.
that. No.
And it's really beautiful, and I went there I had never been to Hungary, and I just heard from my grandma. It was her mother's family who was in Debrecen. So.
Now, what were these shoes? These were shoes that the people had to step out from before they were killed into the.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I know I think they're brass or.
They are treated in a way which was very smart of them. But if you want to see them, Google Earth helps you to see these shoes. And I think they are the most beautiful memorials there are in Europe. There are many, but this is a beautiful one. So the Jews of Budapest could no longer be taken out, but all the Jews from the countryside were taken out. Hungary had a relatively small Jewish population, less than 1 million, and about 450 to 500,000 were killed in a very short period of time. So you can imagine, even though there were 6 crematoria, they were constantly burning and producing a lot of smoke. But I did not know the meaning of it, or I did not want to know the meaning of it. My mother knew it, and I'm amazed how she lived with that knowledge, being in Auschwitz and knowing that this is an extermination camp. But we were fortunate, or it may have been because of the end of the war, but we were shipped out of Auschwitz into a place near Krakow, into a stone quarry. There we worked in a stone quarry, doing no real work. I mean, we carried the stones, but there was nothing being built there. It was a horrible summer, very hot, smoke or dust. There was nothing else. And my mother lost a lot of weight. And when the order came that we had to go back into the wagons, that we were taken somewhere, we had no idea, naturally, that we would be going back to Auschwitz. And back to Auschwitz was a very dangerous thing, because my mother, as I say, looked terrible. I didn't look so good either. I looked like a child does, who lost a lot of weight, maybe 60 pounds or so. And again, I cannot explain it, but we were selected. My mother was asked not to hold my hands and to go the other direction. But knowing what Auschwitz was made it imperative for her to hold on to my hand and to say, ich kann noch arbeiten. I can still work. She knew what the game was about. So we again passed, you can read it all in the book. We passed this horror station. We stayed in Auschwitz for a while. We got tattooed, the meaning of which I still don't understand. But I gave it a meaning. I thought, that's good. If we don't have a name, at least we have a number. But I don't know. But it actually had any purpose other than one other way of distinguishing us or humiliating us. Then it was fall time. I mentioned this earlier. I don't remember any days or months. We didn't have any way of orienting ourselves other than by how the suns were or how the weather fell to us. And at that point in the fall, we were very fortunate. We were shipped out again from Auschwitz. At that point, I was shipped in a place that is currently in the Czech Republic. And there I worked in a big, with a big machine indoors. I remember one particular day, I remember many days, and you can ask me some questions about that. But do you remember? You can't remember, you're too young. But you know, when Roosevelt died in April of 1945, now we Jews in camp or no camp, we thought that he personally will save us. So I never saw the man who was in charge, the German man of this particular factory where we worked. But this day, he stood at the door and told us, everyone who passed the door, that Roosevelt had died. And we didn't believe him. We couldn't, what? That's really the end of us. But the fact of the matter was that the Americans landed already in Normandy, that we didn't even know, the previous June, which made a huge difference in the outcome of the war. Now, it would have given us a lot of hope to know. We knew that the Russians were making progress because we were evacuated from this camp near Krakow because of the Russians. But we had no idea that the Americans were on land. And then, if you want to know the day of liberation, it really didn't come so easily or early. Actually, it didn't come until Armistice Day, which was May 8th, 1945. And I happened to, this is interesting, this is the first time I see a window that goes from the floor to almost to the ceiling, yeah? This is interesting because the picture where the bunk bed that my mother and I shared was not very far from the window. And when we woke up on that day, May 8th, and I saw the sun, I thought, how is that possible? I never saw the sun in bed because we were always awakened when it was still dark. So here they were not calling us out to work, so something was fishy. You never trusted it, that it was something that good will happen. You couldn't think of that. But I went to the window and I looked down, and there I saw a horse and an SS guy, an officer. And he was jumping on his horse while the cars were still standing there. In other words, why should I use the car? I don't know how far I can go without a gas, but a horse can take you places. And that's the only time I followed the man and realized that there was no sentry, that the gate was open. And then I made a mistake. You never know when you make, because I screamed. I couldn't believe what I saw. So whereupon all these women, there were 2,000 of us in that factory room. They all ran after me. And now, if this pane of glass breaks and I'm up, not on the 5th floor like here, but on the 2nd one, I could still lose my life. So I managed to go between the legs and make my way back. But the day was terrible because we really did not know what is going to happen. The Germans were gone, but nobody came. The women were going out and they were trying to find food or whatever. My mother and I, we were just scared. We didn't know what comes next. At the end of the day, one Russian soldier showed up. And then he told us that he had seen hundreds of us and that he had absolutely nothing to give us. And we should just fend for ourselves. So that was hard. But now I will stop, and if you want to know more, then I tell you more.
Yes, go ahead. Could you stand and project?
Again, thank you so much for everything. It's amazing. I wish I could ask you 1,000 questions. I wonder if I can ask you 2.
Please, ask me as many as you like.
First, first of all, did you feel guilty when you survived, and during your life, do you have like episodes of guilt? And second of all, do you believe that religion has done more harm or good along history?
Both are very nice questions. This matter of survivor guilt, I had a hard time understanding, but I could understand that there are two causes that people give. I never felt guilty for surviving. I think my family, who perished, would be happy to know that somebody made it. I didn't feel that it was something I had done that made them die. In other words, let me just tell you what I think is the reason that people speak so much. Many people feel that. One very important reason is people behaved in the camp in ways in which they would not behave under ordinary circumstances. We had a lot of thefts. People were very, very hungry, and they took bread from each other, or they pushed somebody aside when they saw something that they could have, and other was too weak to reach for. The fact of this guilt is horrible. And fortunately, I never had any reason to feel that way. But I can understand why people would feel guilty today for what they had done under those circumstances. Then there were many Jews who came out and did not have that experience, and they felt guilty, and they kind of assumed that everybody who survived it has to feel that way just for having survived. But I never felt that way. Now, in terms of religion, I never had the idea that there is a God somewhere looking out for me. That kind of faith in God, no, I didn't. I think my father really believed in that more concretized sense, that there is somebody who has a judgment or who will make sure that you are okay. I didn't think of that. So I didn't lose anything because I didn't have that anymore at the time. But many people speak about their loss of faith, and some people who affirm their faith. I cannot speak to it because I really don't know much about that. But maybe you have some more question about that, about the faith part.
The question was also linked to like more in history. You know how today like Islamism is a problem, is becoming extremism. So do you believe that in a parallel world where religion would have never existed, do you feel that like religion has done more harm or good?
Oh, more harm than good. No, I cannot judge that. I would say that faith had provided tremendous support to many people, a great deal of support. Harm, I don't see where it could be. Do you?
Not in the faith, but in the wars that it has created.
No, in the larger philosophical sense. Okay. No, I think that it was the first thing that got people to behave. No, I think that the idea, for example, I see that as our history, the 10 Commandments. No, there was no man going up on a mountain and touching God and getting a stone. But we have a beautiful myth that says, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not. This was the law that made an unruly people into something that could be organized because you were told what is right and what is wrong. No, religion had a tremendous function in that way, I think. But I'd never studied it. There are many people, theologians, who spend a lot of time understanding that. And but now you saw harm. Yeah, now I get your point, that there were all these horrible wars around, and that is a terrible thing, you know. Muslims killing Christians and Christians killing Jews and all that. Yes, I get it. I finally got it.
As people leaving, not you in particular, but if you want to stop by and pick up the book, feel free. Don't worry about that. We do have time for a little bit more discussion. Let's go to the back and then we'll come back up. Yeah, if you could stand and speak up.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing these with us.
Can you hear?
And
Yes.
I'm a big believer in our organic, respectful dialogue as a way to at least cause people to question their entrenchment in their beliefs. What would you say, in your experience and your expertise, is the best way to approach that and to inspire dialogue across dividing lines?
Oh, I believe in what you believe in, but it's really, I am now reading things that helps in that kind of a dialoguing. Some people make it sound very easy, but actually it's quite difficult, because I think that somebody there, the first person who got up and said, what do you do with your anger? You know, the first, I remember you asked that question. Very important question, because when you hear their attitude, you feel that rage rising in you, because you are incredulous. You say, how on earth did you come to think that way? But then you say to yourself, this person is asking himself the same about me. So we all live in a bubble here. Yeah, we all live in our own kind, and to break ice with, to talk to people with different persuasion and different beliefs, it's very, very difficult. We have to accept that, and they have to be willing to do that. They have to be willing, and what we found, and I will give you an interesting example too, that if you take the position that you first will listen before you speak, you put yourself in a very advantageous position. Just listen and show a lot of interest in how they, without sarcasm. I made a mistake. I did as a person. I didn't realize I was sarcastic when I asked, and how did you come to think that way? You try to show some genuine interest. Now, I am reading a very interesting book. And that book was interesting to me because it's written by a liberal, democratic social scientist from California, who was interested in why some people in this country vote against their best interest. He went to Louisiana. You read that book?
No, but I've
No, you heard about it? Strangers in Their Own Country. I haven't finished it. But this woman spent 5 years and let these people tell their story to her. They didn't convince her, but now she knows them. She's not judgmental and angry with them, because they have their own story, which to you would not make any sense. But for the sake of abortion and guns, people are willing to breathe bad air, get sick, have their children die young. It doesn't make sense to you. And that is their belief. Will it change? I don't know. But at least I am beginning to think they have their, what she calls deep story, she calls it. And we have every one of us was born into a deep story already. My parents had to survive some kind of persecution and discrimination for me to learn what it is like to build up an inner psychological structure that is responsive to that persecution. I am conditioned to fight against it because of it. So that your past, and this is our psychoanalytic idea too, we do believe very strongly that the past does determine the future, even when it appears to go against that, because you can be the child of a racist and then become working for equality. But that racism had something to do with your working with passion and devotion for equality. So the passion and the feelings come from some deep story. And I think that is a good explanation for that. We have to make every effort to do that. We are definitely. I go outside of Boston and I see Trump country. That's where I see the swastikas. And they are there. Debrecen, hello.
I actually have a picture from when I was in Hungary. I'll show you afterwards.
Yes.
But so we go to the law school, and actually last year there was a swastika carved into a desk at our library.
What was in your library?
A swastika carved in a desk.
At the school.
Oh, right. So it's not that far away.
Yeah, no. So we've been sort of dealing with that. And you've been talking about propaganda, especially during World War II, which I think is very apropos considering Mark Zuckerberg is testifying in front of the Senate. And I'm wondering how people can combat this fake news. I mean, we go to school with some people who think that the ADL is a hate group. Yeah.
Now, this part I didn't understand.
Some people think that the ADL is a hate group.
Oh.
She was saying. Yeah.
So, but my point is that there is a lot of fake news, and I think, like you said, people are very stuck in what they believe, and with the Facebook algorithm, people just get ads targeted to what they want to believe.
Correct.
And how do we sort of fish through all of the fake news and believe anything?
And you have to do that. I don't know if you have a choice. I think about it a lot and worry about it a lot because of the vulnerability we have for it, because of the way we can, and you see that when you see, for example, our own lawmaker, the Congress, you are baffled. Don't they know what this country is about? And it has to do with the particular news, the particular radio station, and in Germany, and it happened, and that's why I feel that study other countries where it happened is very interesting. And having lived there, it makes it easier for me. And having this contact with the ones who, when my dear friend, Alexandra Zemst, whom I quoted earlier, her grandfather was hung in Bratislava. And she was a little girl, but her own mother, the daughter of this murderer, committed suicide. She suffered from depression and she suicided. And she often wondered, why? Now, she had a thesis. She sent me a book, Schweigen tut weh. That means silence hurts. And in that book she writes that because her mother was the only one who knew what actually happened, the rest of the family denied it. Father was in the Russian front. That is the source of denial and the need to perpetuate a fantasy or a way of living. Where do these white supremacists in this country come from? What passion do they bring with their hatred? When I came to this country, I said, the southern whites, they became rich because of the blacks. Why do you hate somebody who is making you rich? I mean, I can understand anti-Semitism long before I understand racism. Because Jews, little as they were, they are outstanding in whatever they happen to undertake. Some of them. And it's enough to make people wonder whether they could influence you in some strange way. So I somehow can see that pattern coming, but I could never quite follow that. So now then I realize it comes back to skin color. How can smart people think that skin color determines who you are? But it does, apparently, or people can think that. So I feel that we, psychologists, have a lot of work to do. So much of that is brain power, this propaganda, this brainwashing. I'm reading a lot of Lifton. Do you know Jay Lifton? No? Jay Lifton is a psychiatrist, still alive, but he studied what happened in China. He was in the Korean War and was on the boat when American soldiers coming back home were preaching communism. They were incarcerated in Korea and given the Book of Mao. And then if you see this movie, The Death of Stalin, you realize this, you saw it, heard about it. The point being that this one-man arrangement, Stalin and Hitler, and hopefully not Trump, can create that situation in our brain. And that connection we have to disrupt somehow, because we are subject to it.
I think we can take one more and then, or all right, two more, but we have to cut exactly at 2 or a little before, here, and then we'll have informal conversation. So please stand. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your remarks. So much of what you said was really striking, but one thing that really stood out to me was at the beginning, you were liberated from the camp, you end up in West Germany, and you move in with a Nazi, and it was so matter of fact. And I guess I'm wondering, in that time, immediately post-war, when, people are returning home and society is reintegrating, how much of a discussion was it, Were you a Nazi? Were you a victim? Was this a common topic of conversation? How much was this?
Okay, because I wanted to be very brief. I tell you very briefly. Sit down so others can see me better. I'm sorry if this be so, just so I could see everybody. Germany was in ruins after the war. We lived in Munich for a year before we went to Heidelberg, because it took time for us to be accepted in the only functioning university, medically functioning, laboratories, faculty, although they were there in Heidelberg. So we went to Munich. There was a other university, because this notion that what you have to do in your life is to go to the university. I mean, where did we get that now? But we grew up with that one too. That is our deep story, that you have to go get your education. That's your job. That's what you have to do first. So we went to Munich. It was a terrible place. It was called United Nations Relief, whatever. So everybody wanted to go to Heidelberg. Why? Because everything else was in ruins. So when you went to Heidelberg, finally accepted in that one good university, then you needed to live somewhere. You went to the city hall. And the city hall kept where there are still empty rooms. They were obliged to rent them to you. You had no questions to ask. Are they SS or are they this? I'm Jewish. No. You were given, go Bahnhofstrasse 7, there you will have to find a room. It was when we were there that we found out who she was. She made no secret about it. At the beginning, people really didn't care to talk about it. Later on, they did. And so that's how we ended up in the SS home. Many people wonder why we went to Germany at all. No. We went from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. There was no country distinction then. We were stateless. We had no passport. We had no money. We needed a place where you could sleep and you get something to eat. And the refugee camps, all of them, refugee camps, were in Western Europe, and Heidelberg was wonderful. That's where the Americans had their headquarters. And eventually, we had really 5 very good years, because we came to this country with a diploma and no money. And you had to have either one or the other. You had no money, you had an education, you had an opportunity to live. Thank you for asking.
So we're going to take one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Anna. I'm curious, because we have cousins in Israel who voted for Trump. And actually one called the day of the election, and he thought we were disconnected but I was so outraged at him calling and lording this over me that I hung up. But he thought we were disconnected, so he called back, and my husband talked to him.
No, the call came from Israel to you
Yeah.
at our in November.
And I just can't understand it. I mean, he's beginning to change his mind when he sees what's going on, but I never could understand.
What you couldn't understand?
How an Israeli, how somebody could vote for somebody like this.
Oh, yeah. Because many Jews here voted because they thought it would be good for Israel. And unfortunately, Israel has now these similar tendencies. So we have to worry about both countries, I think, in that way. But I don't have a good answer for you for that. But what I would love to tell you people that I so enjoyed talking with you all. And I'm so grateful to you, Marty, that you gave me that much time. You know, the big problem is we don't have time for these kinds of conversations. Please make more time for that. You could come to my house. We can talk. I wouldn't mind. I love good conversations. I used to teach that little joke to the end. Can I say a little?
By all means.
My mother would, I could hear her mumble or something. I said, Mom, you're talking to yourself. You know what she said? I like an intelligent conversation.